Getting traded to Minnesota changes nothing.
6'4" guys running 4.4s. These guys don't grow on trees. And a lot of times I'm willing to bet on, especially long term, on the freak athlete.
You don't ever want to overreact to what guys look like in preseason. There's been a ton of preseason all-stars that never make rosters or never pan out.
Welcome back to Belly Up Fantasy Live. Thank you. I am your host, Adam LaRue. As always, joined by Chris Dowhauer. Chris, how are you doing?
Doing good. Football right around the corner, Adam. 2 days away.
Yes,
I mean,
very.
It's no
very
more
exciting.
talking. Actually, get to see some football and not just read about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's an exciting first matchup we get here with the Rams and Bills. So definitely stoked for that. Really a couple good matchups for the first weekend. We'll definitely get into a handful of those today. But what sticks out to you as far as what you're wanting to see this weekend before we get into some of the news?
Just kind of some of the new systems or new players and some of the new systems, I should say. So, looking at the new quarterback team, Russell Wilson kind of returned to Seattle, of course. That's really exciting to see. I talked about that Bills-Rams game, possibly a Super Bowl preview, favorites going head-to-head.
Mm-hmm.
And then some of the, off-the-radar things, such as the Atlanta Falcons, where I'm thrilled to see kind of, the London-Pitts pairing and that kind of, new attack they can kind of use to Arthur Smith. And, we know his ability to kind of, feature that tight end and slot receiver. So some different systems. New Orleans is the other one jumps to mind. So that game in general is going to be exciting to see. So, yeah, I'm really excited to see kind of new faces, new places, and some of the new coaching staffs and seeing, is it going to be same old, or guys that, also we read all season actually going to take, shape?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's going to be really exciting to see how some of these teams, to your point, do to start the season, especially the teams that we don't expect a lot from, or the media or betting circles don't expect a lot from. I mean, it feels like there's normally a team that kind of jumps from out of nowhere or from mediocrity into some kind of contention. So kind of looking at who will that be this year. Definitely a handful of teams that I think are projected, close to 500 or a little less that have a strong opportunity to jump out. But I mean, we saw, obviously this was a handful of years ago now, but the Panthers, when they went on their Super Bowl run where they ultimately lost, the year prior, they were 7-8-1, then all of a sudden they're 14-2 the next season. So those jumps happen. So definitely keen to see, if there's anything like that going on this season. Like I said, though, we're going to get into some news, and one that I am very excited about, as I've been drafting this guy all over the place and have been preaching for you all to do so as well all summer. And that is James Robinson is ready for week one. He will be playing week one. Chris, how do we feel about this?
Yeah, I have a couple of my fantasy teams, so I'm definitely taking your advice about rostering James Robinson. But I'm a little cautious. I tend to be when it comes off injuries, especially with my expectations of the guys, when I expect them to kind of be eased in. Now, maybe he comes out right off the bat and gets 15, 20 carries. I doubt it. So I kind of like to kind of wait on these guys. So he won't be somebody I'm necessarily playing this week, even though he'll be active. But I will definitely watching to see how many snaps he gets. How does he look? Does he look explosive? I think the big thing do you want to see James Robinson? Is he had the same kind of burst he had, average of 4.6 yards per carry last year with a basically atrocious offensive line and a questionable system at best. So I think James Robinson has a chance to kind of shine, but you don't want to expect too much, week one personally.
No, absolutely agreed. We'll belly up Fantasy Lives, most of the same channels. You'll see Andrew and the crew on Saturday do some start-sit stuff. But preview of that is a lot of these guys, whether it's J.K. Dobbins if he ends up playing, or James Robinson, or these guys that are coming off injuries and they make it, but it's really tight. Those are kind of the guys that week one I'm going to want to stay away from, but I'm still really excited that they're here sooner rather than later. Michael Thomas, another example of that, although he's been around for a little bit longer, and as such, a little bit more likely to throw him into your lineup. But if you don't have to, then you're not going to. Moving on to our next piece of news. That's another guy coming off of injury. That's Isaiah McKenzie. He had a little hiccup there for the last week or two. He was a full participant in practice today. Many eyes on what ends up happening with that slot role in Buffalo, because it is one that gets featured heavily, or at least it had under Dable. Of course, we'll see. If that continues to be the case. I expect it will be, but nonetheless, Chris, is McKenzie your guy kind of in that slot, role in Buffalo? If, obviously now that he's healthy.
Yeah, well, first of all, just finish off, Jacksonville point. Travis Etienne is still a good play, so don't get nervous just because you hear James Robinson is going to be healthy. I think it's some guy you still want to have in your lineups. Moving on to this situation, I think that McKenzie's the guy that's more explosive. They signed Jamison Crowder, but they don't have a lot vested in him other than this year. They have every reason in the world kind of move on from the guy. He's been injured a lot. He's already had problems with that being in Buffalo. So McKenzie, showed you something last year, had that nice game versus Atlanta where he had about 10, 11 catches, shows you can kind of shine in that role. And you've heard nothing but praise, great things about him in camp. This Buffalo team's going to play a lot of 3 receiver sets. That's not going to necessarily change. We've heard all the time about Gabriel Davis. Well, McKenzie's the guy that I think if you're in a full point PPR league, you definitely are rostering. Maybe even half point, some standard leagues you're looking at this guy, because he might have one of those floors that Cole Beasley did a couple of years ago where you can kind of shine out a little more explosive than Cole Beasley. And just to add one more plug, on Fridays we cover our DFS show and MD's Fantasy Football Show. And to me, this is a guy that I have as on my DFS lineups that Thursday night game, and a lot of my playing for a lot of things. He's very cheap. And I have him for a captain in a few different teams where, you can play him cheap, and a guy who's probably going to get featured versus the Rams, because I don't think Jalen Ramsey is going to be shadowing him.
Yeah, definitely good call, and definitely make sure to check out their show on Friday. Always some real quality stuff, especially once you are into the season. So much good knowledge over there. Our next piece of news before we get into some of the depth chart news, which is a little bit separate. Van Jefferson is still day-to-day with his injury, which could open the door for someone like a Tutu or like a Skoronek, or even their guy that, won the roster spot a while ago, or, a couple weeks ago. So definitely could be a door opened if Van Jefferson is unable to suit it up this upcoming Sunday. What's your thought as far as that third receiver for this Rams offense? Because it's a position that gets utilized quite a bit, but with it, being a question mark right now as to who's going to play, are you avoiding it at least for week one?
Not necessarily. So I'll throw a third name into that kind of, name with the third receiver stepping up, and I'll put Tyler Higbee in there. This is a guy that we've kind of been waiting for to kind of shine. Matthew Stafford tends to like to do those tight ends. We've been kind of waiting for him. He's going to be out there because he blocks. He was out there from over 80% of the snaps last year. So Tyler Higbee might be a guy. Now, it's a tough matchup because Milano is a great coverage linebacker for Buffalo, But if you can get some matchups off of him versus some of these safeties or some of these other linebackers, Edmonds is the best coverage guy in the world. So Higbee's a guy I would kind of keep in mind. I would necessarily bank on one of those third receivers. I think you're going to see kind of a specialist roles kind of shine out. We saw like Deshaun Jackson last year have that kind of speed role. I think you're going to see Tutu have that kind of role. You might see the other receivers kind of rotate. Slower Quetch. I can't believe he's on that team. I hate him. But also the kid you're talking about that made the team. They have some different options there. But I think overall you're going to see guys kind of filling in different roles per se, whether it's a blocking role or that red zone role or the big play role. I don't think guys going to kind of be shine out as that third guy until Van Jefferson kind of returns.
Yeah, 100%. I definitely think unless Van Jefferson is the guy, it'll be a combination unless someone truly steps up, for sure. So let's go ahead and get a word from our sponsor, Manscaped, and of course Dan, who goes ahead and reads over that. It's always amazing. We'll get a word from them, and then when we get back, we'll be into the depth charts that have kind of been announced over the last day or two. Definitely some interesting, pieces of knowledge for us to go over as we head into the season.
Fellas, the fantasy football draft season is right around the corner. CeeDee Lamb is good, but have you seen these beautiful balls? It's time to get your snake looking right for this snake draft with sponsors of today's show, Manscaped. The leaders in below-the-waist grooming have created a championship lineup with the Performance Package 4.0. Join the 6 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped and get ready for kickoff by going to manscaped.com for 20% off and free shipping with the promo code BellyUpFantasy. Inside the Performance Package 4.0, you'll find their Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer, Weed Whacker ear and nose hair trimmer, Crop Preserver ball deodorant, Crop Reviver toner, Performance Boxer briefs, and a travel bag to hold all your goodies. Tom Brady didn't come out of retirement for you to have hairy balls. So slot it at the quarterback and get 20% off and free shipping when you use the promo code BellyUpFantasy at manscaped.com. That's 20% off and free shipping when you use the promo code BellyUpFantasy at manscaped.com. It's time to put the PP back in a PPR league.
And we are back. Thank you so much, Dan, and thank you so much to Manscaped. Definitely make sure to go ahead and check their stuff out. Again, we're going to get into some depth chart stuff. So our first order of business is the Dallas Cowboys. Noah Brown is a starter for the Dallas Cowboys, which how their receiver group is having all these injuries and whatnot for week one. I'm not going to take too much stock in that, but it is certainly something worth mentioning because of the passing volume that's here. What I found most interesting, and Chris, temperature gauge me here, was that officially, at least on the depth chart, or officially, unofficially, they're the unofficial depth charts, until about game time when the quote-unquote official ones come out. But for all intents and purposes, this is what the coaches are working with. And that's that Jalen Tolbert actually is the backup to Michael Gallup when Michael Gallup eventually returns, at least according to the depth chart. So, Chris, do you believe that in 3 wide receiver sets that Noah Brown will outlast Jalen Tolbert in those sets, in those situations?
I do not. I think that what you're basically, I think that what you're going to see is kind of a personal grouping depending on what what's going on in the game. You saw this in San Francisco. You see Jennings play. You'll see Kendrick Bourne back in the day play. The guys who are kind of with a blocking slot receiver. This still doesn't mean that you're not going to see Debo or Ayuk out there necessarily, but you're going to see that other receiver out there sometimes, especially on running situations. So, yes, I think that he has a role. I know Brown's probably the guy who does the dirty things. He's a good blocker, a guy who, is a good possession receiver, but doesn't bring a whole lot other to the offense. I also caution everybody, and I kind of bitched about this off air earlier today about always updates about these unofficial depth charts. Basically, it's just us guessing, or people, whoever they're posting it, guessing who they think should be the starter or what's going to happen. I think, basically we realize that when it comes to the food chain, who's probably going to get targeted, third or fourth most on this offense is really probably going to be a Tolbert versus a Noah Brown. Maybe it could change. Maybe Noah Brown will shine out, but I haven't heard that great of things from camp. They all of a sudden think Noah Brown's going to be, the second coming. So I think this is more of a formality than an actual depth thing that I'm, be worried about with Jalen Tolbert. I'm not big on Tolbert as it is, but I can't jump on that one.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Don't read too much into that unless Noah Brown was to start playing out of his mind to start the season. But until I see it, I'm not going to believe it on that one. Our next one, though, a little bit more uplifting for you, Chris, is Rhonda Moore is officially listed as a starter in Arizona. Yeah, he will be. He will have a role here, which I think is big here in year 2. There's also no clear RB2. It was distinctly Henderson or Benjamin. So there's no clear RB2, at least as of now. But Rhonda Moore, I think, is the big one here. So, Chris, what are your thoughts there? Yeah,
I think this is a little bit different, than the Rams situation. We talked about a third or fourth receiver. What can they kind of do? Lance McClendon is the other receiver we were talking about earlier. Don't necessarily read into, preseason hype. So in this situation, we didn't see a lot of Rondell Moore with Arizona, but we do know Christian Kirk moved on, who played quite a bit of snaps. We know DeAndre Hopkins is going to miss the first 8 weeks. We know Marquise Brown's on the team, but Marquise Brown also gets injured quite often, has a lot of soft tissue injuries. So when you look at this roster in general, one of the weapons that seems to be kind of consistent will be Rondell Moore. Whether he's going to be utilized as kind of a gadget player we saw last year, or, which I think you're going to see a lot more, is actually being utilized as a receiver, because this guy isn't just a gadget player. He's a fantastic route runner, one of the explosive receivers coming out of college 2 years ago. So I think he'll get kind of unleashed, especially in that slot position. I'm not worried long-term either about him kind of, getting forgotten about as the season progresses. I think if anything, when Hopkins returns or Marquise Brown's shining, it's not going to hurt Rondell Moore, as it's going to make his job easier. All he has to do is run the option routes. Basically. And in Kyle Murray's system, in that Arizona system, you can eat quite well off of that, and you can make big plays, especially with the ball in your hands. I think Rondell Moore quietly, been forgotten about as a second-year player because he didn't have that great rookie year. He didn't kind of shine out like Elijah Moore had that great stretch. But this guy can do just as much as anybody else going to that coming out of that draft last year. So I think Rondell Moore is going to kind of shine out, especially in this role.
Yeah, I think he's great value wherever you can get your hands on him for sure. Definitely go ahead and do it. Our next one, another one that's a bit more of a formality. Both of these pieces, really, I think we expected both of these, but it came out today officially. Not only is Trubisky the starter, which is the news today, but also he is a captain. He was actually named a captain before he was named the starter, but today he was officially finally named the starter. Also, Jaylen Warren has officially won the RB2 battle for the time being over Benny Snell and company over in Pittsburgh. So, yeah, I don't think that there's anything too unheard of, too out of the blue here. So I think we can kind of move on to our next piece. And Chris, I do kind of want your take here, and that is Rashad White is the RB2 in Tampa Bay. He had some struggles in the preseason, week 2 especially, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly. But nonetheless, he does win out for the RB2 job in Tampa Bay. So, Chris, does that move the needle for you at all, especially given his strengths, whereas this pass-catching guy? And obviously, we've seen in Tom Brady offenses that be a very fruitful role for running back. So, is this Lenny's still going to be the workhorse we kind of saw him be last year for most of the time where he was healthy, or is there some inkling of value here?
So just a couple of things on this situation. So from what I'm understanding from Tampa Bay insiders, no, Fournette's not going to have necessarily the same role he had last year. They don't want him having 18 to 25 carries or touches per game. They think that was too much. They kind of wore him down a little bit. He didn't really have that usage initially in the beginning of the season. You kind of saw that as guys got banged up and as they kind of needed him, he had stepped up. It was great for fantasy owners, but for the team, they feel like it's something they don't necessarily want Fournette to have to do all season long. So there will be more guys involved. Now, it doesn't necessarily hurt him because if he gets, still most of the key touches, so most of the time he's out there in red zone time or down there in pass situations, losing a couple snaps here or there is not going to make or break Fournette. But what I do think I also hear is that when it comes to Rashad White, yes, he's number 2, but if anything was to happen to Fournette, that there would basically be a committee that was going to basically replace him. We saw this in New England, and you usually see that with Tom Brady. There's going to be a guy who catches the passes, and it could be White, but it also could be Gio Bernard, who's still on this roster, did resign. It also could be the running backs in general fall pretty far in the food chain when you look at the receiver court. Julio Jones is your 4th receiver. Russell Gage is out there. So there's a lot of guys that, can be fed for targets that I don't necessarily think that what we thought the great pass catcher, I don't know if it's going to necessarily be as fruitful as you hoped. We saw that with Gio Bernard last year. We kept waiting for Gio Bernard to be worth something and never kind of, wind up really panning out. So, yeah, I think if there's an injury, he puts it on my radar, but it doesn't make me kind of jump all over White because I think this is still something that remains to be seen. And like I said, everything I hear, there'd be Keyshawn Vaughn usage, there'd be Gio Bernard usage, there'd be White usage because, yeah, he didn't do everything perfectly in preseason, and there are some struggles, so there'd be kind of a rotation of backs accordingly.
Yeah, definitely what I would expect as well. Again, he wouldn't, if there was an injury, he wouldn't do more than a role. I don't think he's a completely well-rounded back just quite yet. Moving on to our next one, and this is a quick one. On the Chargers, there's no clear RB2. Of course, Sony Michelle just came to town after being released from the Dolphins. He has immediately slotted in, kind of similar to how we talked about, Benjamin and Daryl Henderson. It is listed on the depth chart as Robert Kelly or Sony Michelle. So I don't know about you, Chris, but that to me seems like it's Sony Michelle's once he learns this freaking playbook. Like once he's locked in, that's Sony Michelle's RB2 role, unless, Chris, if you think I'm mistaken.
No, well, first of all, we are mistaken with is it's Daryl Williams, not Daryl Henderson. I think the Arizona wishes they had Daryl Henderson pairing with Benjamin.
Yes, correct. Correct.
But I think that Benjamin and Daryl Williams have more of a clear role where Benjamin's going to be a pass catching guy similar to Chase Edmonds. But if something were to happen to James Conner, you're probably going to see that both of those guys, where Williams would be the short yardage guy, kind of what he was in Kansas City. He's a good pass protector, catch the ball a little bit. In this situation, I think Sony Michelle is a speculative buy. I heard, Kelly looked better. Kelly's been there for 2 years now. I think he's done nothing, overly special. And even when he kind of shines out, quote unquote, does he do anything more than Sony Michelle can do? So for me, I think Sony Michelle is the guy that I'm going to add. Is when I'm kind of being speculative. I would probably invest my, time and resources if I have a roster spot. I also think that this is also a really important place for Sony Michelle to kind of save his career, so to speak. If it doesn't kind of pan out, if he doesn't become that second running back, this guy can quickly be forgotten about and out of the league soon. So I also think he has all the motivation in the world to kind of, earn that role. And I know he hasn't been utilized the way that he had been in college, which I still don't understand. But he has a lot of similar skill sets to Melvin Gordon. So I love you to comment on that, Adam, because I think that you kind of saw that with Sony Michelle too. That this is a guy who can't catch the ball. So when it looks at what he could do with Eckler, it's interesting.
Yeah, no, well, also, I think the reason this has been such a hot topic thing as far as, who's going to be the RB2 in LA is because Eckler does have some injury history, and he is an older back, a smaller back, and one that's getting used a lot. So I think that there is real importance in finding who is going to be that second guy for the Chargers, because either A, they're going to get a lot of run from the onset because they're trying to keep Eckler healthy, or B, you're likely going to see him eventually due to injury or some kind of rest or whatever. But yes, Sony Michelle's skill set, it's definitely it's well-rounded. He is a good between the tackle runner, which he really, I feel like became more of a strength in the pros. I feel like, at Georgia, he was someone who his speed and his quickness were winning him on the outside and as a receiver and doing all things really well there. But he can be utilized in any way, shape, or form as a running back in the pros now. So he could definitely be one of those, like an Alexander Madison-esque handcuff, where they immediately jolt to being a starting running back whenever there is an injury to that starter in front of them.
And don't forget, we could trace the system back to New Orleans, where we saw Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara pair up quite often. So that's something that, as you talked about the second running back having a role, this guy could easily be that kind of Mark Ingram in this backfield.
Yeah, no question. All right, so our final one, is Wandel Robinson and Kadarius Toney are both listed as starters for the Giants in the Dable system. Now the question is, because it isn't specified on these unofficial depth charts, they're both starting at receiver. That's great. I don't trust Daniel Jones through to the outside. Who is our slot?
Everything I'm hearing, it's Robinson.
That's
who I heard for most of the camp.
I'm feeling as well, but we're not going to know really until we get into game time. I mean, more or less. I mean, we can guess a little bit based on the guys behind them on said depth chart. Like, is this a slot guy? Is this not a slot guy? But at the end of the day, we don't know where they're going to line up, how much they're going to move around. All of those things we won't know until the game time happens. If I'm going to bet, though, like you said, I'm betting on Robinson. And that's why we'll be talking about him a little bit later. With that, is there anything else depth chart wise that I missed that you may want to hit on?
Damian Pierce is going to be the starter, just in case people seem to be like magically known just for the first time. Yeah, they have two running backs that don't play special teams primarily, so one of them is probably going to be the starter. Yeah, thanks for unofficial depth chart updates.
Awesome. Yes. All right, so we're going to get into some streaming options for those of you who are streaming, which is I set it up for quarterback and defense because I feel like those are the position most likely to be streamed, to be guys that week to week you're starting different guys, debated including tight end there, but I think normally you're going to have at least a guy on the roster year round or pretty close to it. So quarterback, I'm going to go ahead and start, and my homer pick for the week will be Matt Ryan, matchup based, playing Houston week 1. Just feels like a good matchup where you could really see a top 12 finish for him, probably towards the lower end, but that's kind of what you get when you end up streaming the quarterback position, unless you get someone that has that upside, or like Ryan Tannehill a few years ago where you just kind of luck into someone balling out. But I mean, that's just kind of a matchup that is decent to target, in my opinion. As far as ownership goes, he's 23.7% rostership on ESPN, 44% on Sleepers, so some disparity there. But he's someone who, if you happen to be streaming in your work league on ESPN, definitely could go ahead and grab him and get you at least a clean 20. Chris, you have any streaming options at quarterback?
Well, first of all, I definitely love the Matt Ryan take. I think that you need to nail on the head. I don't love Matt Ryan as much as everybody else does for the whole season, but versus a team that has a defense that's questionable at best, who's adjusting their system also because they're not playing necessarily the same Lovie Smith system now, and you have I believe I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I believe Carson Wentz, Philip Rivers both had really nice games. Those first games when they played. On their debut, Frank Reich tends to get up for the first game of the season, tends to game plan well for that first game of the season. So yeah, I think Matt Ryan is definitely a great value, a great steal. One of the guys that I think that people kind of maybe are just writing off isn't necessarily somebody who I love, but is a good streaming option is Justin Fields, the guy that we hear all about everybody being compared to doing what Jalen Hurts did last year. Well, I don't know exactly he's going to do what Jalen Hurts did last year, but I know he's going to run the ball a lot more than he did last year. That's nothing, but that's the one thing that I can say that I've heard pretty confidently coming out of Chicago, that Luke Gotze is going to put him in position to utilize his legs, going to be a lot of RPO action. Now, the offensive line's atrocious, and it's going to could get ugly at some points during this game, because we saw last year when there's pass rush, what could happen Justin Fields and Chicago's offensive line. But for fantasy purposes, it's a lot of extra scrambling yards, extra little third 19, you scramble for 15, pick up some yards here or there, a lot of easier throws. Cole Clement matches up well with that secondary. The safeties are nothing to write home to me. Ward's banged up in San Francisco. So Fields is a guy who I think it's a safe floor with the legs. That's a little bit of upside that you might be able to put in your lineup this week, where sometimes the streamers you're kind of just hoping to get what you're getting. Justin Fields might get a little bit more than you're hoping for.
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about this a week or two ago. But certainly, I think the wide receivers of the Bears, which are bad, and I will probably never throughout the rest of the season say this again, but mixed with the Niners corners, I think that's a really interesting matchup. Now, overall, talent-wise, I would still probably, unfortunately, lean the Niners. However, the actual skill set of the Bears receivers, all of them being deep threats, fast guys, Justin Fields has plenty of arm. Certainly, like you said, has that passing upside mixed in with that rushing floor. So, yeah, definitely don't mind the pick. My next guy, as far as a streaming quarterback, would be Jameis Winston. Plays the Falcons. He's got pretty decent ownership. He's actually above the 50% mark on Sleeper, but ESPN still only 32, actually pretty much 33 to 32.9. But certainly someone who, again, in a work league, probably available, someone you can go grab off of waivers. And again, we're going to see Michael Thomas back. We have Olave. We have Jarvis Landry. Definitely have some options here. We'll have Kamara week 1. This defense is awesome. So I think an Atlanta matchup week 1, I personally believe that Atlanta will be better than a lot of people are giving them credit. However, that is a pretty decent matchup for the Saints team week 1 across the board. With that, I think Jameis could definitely get a handful of passing touchdowns here, similar to what he did against Green Bay to start off last season, where, it's not a ton of volume, not a ton of yards, but just getting a couple touchdowns because, they don't have, unless they want to, shove in a Mark Ingram on the goal line. That's not Alvin Kamara's game. He's going to be catching the ball in the end zone. So, Chris, any thoughts there? Or another guy?
Yeah, Winston's a little hard for me because I'd actually thought about him earlier, and I really love Jameis Winston for this season. And I think that's going to be a recommendation for a lot of people to, it's a good streaming option. My concern is that I think Atlanta's defense might be surprisingly good, especially that secondary. They have, in Terrell, a shutdown corner.
Yes,
not many
agreed.
teams do have a shutdown corner. And then you have the fact that they added, numerous pieces for this offseason. This secondary, from everything I'm hearing, especially out of camp, looks pretty good. The linebackers are flying around too. So this Atlanta defense might not, wasn't anything to write home about last year. People just kind of assume that you're going to have a nice, easy game. But that defense might be better than people think. So that's my only interpretation. I think, Jameis is not a bad play. I just kind of throw some caution that Atlanta might not be as bad as people assume that they are, because that defense, from everything I'm hearing, is pretty good. And like I said, when you have a shutdown corner, things can really, fall into place for you.
Yeah, certainly agree. Definitely good point. Do you have another quarterback you want to bring up? Otherwise, I'll hit my last one.
So this one I'm kind of throwing out. You talked about your homer, and I agree with Matt Ryan. I had him on my list. The other one I'm going to go is the guy who's no longer in Indianapolis, is starting off in Washington, and that's Carson Wentz. Jacksonville's defense also, I heard, looks a bit better than they had, and it has a little bit of people flying around. Having said that, I still have questions about that offense in general. I think that when you look at their front four of Washington, even without their edge rusher, they still have the ability to get to the quarterback. They're still going to probably give Trevor Lawrence a lot of hard time, causing turnovers possibly. This defense definitely severely underachieved last year, saying it at least. So I think offensively, they have a pretty good setup where they can get some short yardage fields. They have good explosive receivers on the outside. Terry McLaurin's going to be matched up with some different guys out there. I know, that they have Griffin in Jacksonville. They added Campbell. I heard good things about this offseason. But still, the secondary is still questionable at best, I think. And Jacksonville's a team I think you could exploit, especially the fact that their offense is probably going to be off the field. Their offense is going to probably put them off on the field a lot of times defensively, allowing Washington to kind of have a decent amount of opportunities to score.
Yeah, no, this is definitely a good one. Yeah, I like that. I mean, I've been saying it all off season. People are going to underestimate Wentz in this situation. And again, I am glad to be off the Wentz train as a Colts fan. But at the end of the day, there has not been a competent quarterback in Washington for a very long time. Wentz is much, much better than what they've been trotting out there. So, I mean, we saw Heineke be decent in stretches over the last, year and a half or so. We've seen some of these other guys have stretches. I definitely don't think I think he's going to be better than those guys. And this is a matchup that you can absolutely go ahead and hit, even if this defense is a little bit better than last year. And I definitely think that after how much of the blame Wentz was given for the last game in Jacksonville last year, he may come very prepared for this go around.
Yeah, it's also a good matchup for this Washington offensive line where they're not, they're atrocious. But Allen's and pass rush on the outside. Most of Jacksonville's edge rushers are their key. They don't really get a lot of interior rush, and that's how you get Carson Wentz and Washington all kind of off their game. So I think that kind of adds up well for him as well.
Mm-hmm. Good call up for sure. My last guy, moving back to Wentz's former division, Ryan Tannehill against the Giants, 16.5% in ESPN rosterships, 27% in sleeper. We have all fallen completely off of Tannehill, and I'm a little bit shocked that it's to this degree. I'm kind of shocked that he's behind the other two quarterbacks that I mentioned as far as, what percent of rosters that he's on. Tannehill is not some great quarterback, but he is a good quarterback that is a perfect scheme fit for what they do. Obviously, they have Woods, and again, Giants are not a good team. Probably near the bottom of the league with the two in the AFC South. They're not going to be very good. This is a good matchup for Tannehill to start off the season. Show some love to his new receiver group in Burks, in Woods, in Phillips, all these guys. I definitely could see a good start off of the season for Tannehill.
Great call, Adam. It's not just my mind, but I think that's probably one of the best calls of the week. When you look at the matchup versus the Giants, I pride myself in knowing personnel pretty well and scouting pretty well. I can't name you the three corners for the Giants right now.
Yeah,
I don't know their starting secondary right now. So, yeah, losing Bradbury was huge for them. They definitely have to replace him. So I think that's a great call. People are kind of writing off Tennessee, but when you look at the matchup, it's an outstanding matchup, especially for a team that has a lot to prove.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So on to the defenses, and this is definitely something that I'm going to want your take on a lot because, again, these defenses a lot better than I think most do. So I'm going to go ahead, though, start off with the Dolphins. An interesting one, but with the Pats and kind of with everything we've heard about, the two guys that are calling plays here for the Patriots. That's a matchup, obviously, that I'm interested in, just purely based on that. And realistically, even if, the play calling isn't atrocious with those two, it's probably not going to hurt you that bad. Just one, this defense has a ton of talent, and two, just the way this game would go if the Patriots were calling it well, it would likely be a low-scoring game anyways, sub 20. So I feel like your risk reward here is just in a pretty decent spot.
Yeah, look, this was a hard one for me because I do agree with you. I think the Dolphins have a good defense on paper and definitely were shining out towards the end of last year. My co-host reminded me of one of our shows we discussed about that. Without Flores, though, and he took over the play calling for defense, and their defensively they weren't doing so great in the beginning of the season. It took Flores taking over and kind of being aggressive again. So I say all that because if this defense is kind of is returning to not being aggressive like it was beginning of the season, and this is a defense that's from New England, so one team that might have a chance to game plan for it might be New England. And I'll add one more caveat. The other thing that's concerning is the secondary of the offense, while it eventually will be really good, it's severely banged up. I'm not sure if they're going to have Jones right now. Their third corner is iffy at best. So he slides up to the second corner. You have some questions. So I say all that. I agree with you. There's a safe floor there. I don't think it's going to be a shootout by such the means the game's probably not going to be very high scoring. I've heard nothing but good things about New England defense as well. But I do think my only interpretation would be that there is maybe some caution that this is a team that might be prepared for it. I myself own the Dolphins defense in a lot of my leagues, but I'm not playing them week one just for that kind of reason. I kind of want to see, did you learn your lesson last year, so to speak?
All right. Definitely. We'll be keeping an eye on them. Chris, do you have a defense you want to throw out?
Yeah, so I do think, like I said, I don't think it's a bad one. The Dolphins is definitely an interesting one. For myself, I have Washington on that list. I talked about earlier about Jacksonville. I know everybody's excited that Trevor Lawrence has been freed from Urban Meyer. Yay, yay, yay. They still have Zay Jones, basically, or Marvin Jones, whatever Jones you want to pick as your second best receiver at best. Offensive line that is questionable. I know they added some different pieces, but it still has to kind of gel. A brand new system that you're still kind of adjusting to. And a quarterback who tends to miss high. So you put all those things together with a pass rush that should have, be able to get home. I think for myself, I have Washington as one of those streaming options this week.
Yeah, no, I like that. Definitely think that their defense can kind of return to form after really being underwhelming last year. Hopefully Washington as a whole can kind of return to form, kind of what we expected out of them. But yeah, definitely agreed. That's a good matchup for them. The Cincinnati Bengals here in week 1 are one that I'm very interested in, at least. Not the best defense in the world, but intrigued by the Steelers matchup week 1. Definitely all this receiver talent. But with weaknesses at O-line, at quarterback, still continuing, I'm just not going to buy into the Steelers' offense being good until I see otherwise. And that leaves me with a rivalry game where Trey Hendrickson could wreak havoc on Trubisky anytime he goes to roll out. That's about the only thing Trubisky can really do well. So I don't know. That's one that I'm interested in. It could certainly bite you if these receivers are able to get loose because they do have a ton of talent. But you could also see a Bengals defense rack up a lot of sacks and a couple turnovers here pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's always appealing to go play against Trubisky, so I can't fault that one too much. I do have a little bit of trepidation. I do think Pittsburgh matches up well with them. I don't love the Cincinnati's defense. I think it's really overachieved in their playoff run last year. You talked about Hendrickson. I think there's Hendrickson, and maybe you could throw Hubbard into that discussion, and they have really little else on defense, especially at that front seven. So I do have a little concerns that they can keep Trubisky kind of in that pocket. Can they stop Harris? Can they stop some of those weapons? But overall, you make great points that there's probably a turnover to waiting against Mitchell Trubisky, for God's sake, so he's probably going to turn the ball over at some point sooner than later. So not a bad call.
Yeah. All right. You got another one here?
So my other one, you talked about this team earlier in the Giants. Tennessee Titans defense.
Yep.
Is definitely healthier. I know they aren't quite there yet, so lost some pieces, but they're continue to add more guys. They have a good secondary, young secondary, kind of up and coming guys who like Farley didn't play last year. So I'm really interested in seeing their defense in general, but an offense that should be able to kind of dominate the line of scrimmage. I wouldn't be surprised the defense to do similar. We've heard nothing good with the offensive line necessarily out of the Giants. Daniel Jones loves to turn the ball over. So I know everybody's kind of, giving the Giants and Daniel Jones a new shot. And Tony's healthy, and we're talking about Robinson. But we also know it can get quite ugly in New York real quickly offensively. So Tennessee Titans is one of those guys that I think is a good play this week.
Yeah, no, agreed. Actually, that was my third pick as well. So just throw it out there that they are very available, actually. 14.5% ESPN, 33% sleeper as far as what percent of rosters they're on. So both of these teams, or both platforms, you're able to get the Tennessee Titans defense in a lot of leagues, and that's a matchup that, like you said, really great. The Tennessee Titans defense should be a lot better than it was last year, and a lot better than people are giving it credit for this year, to be frank. But with that, unless you have any honorable mentions, we can move on to just general waivers, guys who are interested in off waivers week 1. If, for instance, you drafted, mid preseason or a handful of weeks ago, and you ended up with kind of one of these preseason training camp hype guys that ended up not getting the role you expected. You have a spot open. These could be guys to transition to. But Chris, any other defenses before we switch over?
Yeah, I'll just throw one real quick out there. I know we talked about kind of upside Justin Fields, but San Francisco's defense is a good play versus Chicago. That offense is bad. The offensive line is bad. We did see last year when, like I talked about, Trubisky getting Justin Fields getting hit. He sacked 7 times. I mean, he was basically just, it was a siege going on out there. So that's one team to kind of keep in mind. The 49er front 7 is definitely better than that Chicago Bear front line. So that's one of the defenses to keep in mind.
Yep, absolutely. All right, let's get into waivers. And my first guy that I want to throw out there, ESPN, mostly he's on most rosters in sleeper. But if you're in a work league and Daryl Henderson is sitting on waivers, where on ESPN he's at 43%, go ahead and pick up Daryl Henderson. At worst, I think he probably might have some standalone value, and at best, he's one of the best handcuffs in fantasy football right now, on one of the best offenses in NFL football right now. So certainly a guy, there's not many guys better to have on your bench because he actually has true upside, if something was to happen to Akers. Or again, he may have some standalone value. We'll kind of see how this running back situation shakes out in LA.
Yeah, I like that one. It's definitely a good one. We talked about this next player on my list that we talked about earlier in the show. That's Rhonda Moore. I think Rhonda Moore is still a guy out there. It's a roster spot worth taking. I know a lot of times there's some receivers that I definitely like later on in this draft, but the guy that has a lot of upside, we talked about Kansas City, we talked about Green Bay. Why can't this guy in an offense is basically going to throw for 300 yards every game? You can clearly see a role for him. Zach Ertz is getting any younger. Rhonda Moore is kind of the future for this Arizona team and was drafted in the second round. So what we saw last year, don't hold against him. I think Rhonda Moore is a guy you should be looking to add to your team sooner than later.
Yeah, no, agreed. That's a really good one. Yeah, I think he has a really good opportunity to take up that role that Christian Kirk had last year, which was pretty fruitful in a lot of instances. Another second-year guy at wide receiver who I find very interesting. Not going to play him week 1, but certainly someone who I'd either watch list or go ahead and take up off waivers if my bench is a little out of shape. That's Nico Collins. He's only 20% of ESPN, 29% sleeper. He's a starting wide receiver too at the end of the day. I don't believe in Davis Mills. I don't believe in the Texans. However, there's absolutely in the realm of possibilities a world where, Nico Collins is able to step up and this offense is able to step up. So certainly, and then if not, they could just have volume trying to come back, kind of some of the things that we were talking about with Justin Fields, where you find yourselves, clawing your way back into games. How we saw the Bears' other quarterback, Mr. Trubisky, a handful of years ago, have a pretty solid fantasy finish. When you're just, getting a lot of those garbage times points, that's certainly something you could see with Houston. So Nico Collins, definitely an interesting one, just by sheer fact of, again, he's the second threat in a passing offense.
Yeah, so my other one's going to be Ryan Moser. I think Chase Edmonds is definitely the guy to own in the Miami backfield. I think he's the safest guy. He's going to be involved in the pass situation. But Ryan Moser, when he's healthy, has been excellent in this system. And so Michelle did get cut, as we talked about earlier in the show, is now no longer in that backfield. There's no clear guy to kind of threaten him as the early down role as long as he's healthy. So Ryan Moser, to me, is a guy who's basically not even being forgotten about. And if you're a Chase Edmonds owner specifically, you definitely want to add him. But even if you're not, Ryan Moser's the guy that there's some upside there to add to your team.
Yeah, no, agreed. He's definitely someone still has the speed whenever he's healthy. So can take one to the house at any given time. This, that scheme coming largely from both the Rams and the Niners. Obviously, Mostert, the former Niner, familiar with the scheme and a great fit for it too. My next guy, Romeo Dobbs, of course, we've talked about him a million times, but still Sleeper has caught on. He's above 50% on Sleeper, but on ESPN, a dreadful 19.5% rostership. And he's someone who could quickly carve out a massive role in, an elite franchise quarterback's offense. Definitely someone who is worth having on your bench. A mistake that I think a lot of fantasy owners make, just as an aside, is that, having these guys who don't have upside on their bench, but, kind of offer the safe floor. You can get safe floors off of waivers, especially in a lot of these ESPN leagues, relatively easily. So it's better, I think, in a lot of instances to just chase upside on your waivers or on your bench and be able to kind of cycle through at least your bottom 2 to 3 roster spots. Not saying have, lottery tickets as every single bench spot, but save a couple of them, for that purpose to cycle through That way you can kind of hit on guys rather than just having someone, score 12 points a week on your bench. But, you're never make it to the point where you want to start him, but then you feel weird cutting him too because he's consistently providing value. You don't want to be in that position where, Waster spot's just essentially wasted. But yeah, Dobbs is definitely a good fit there. He has a ton of upside.
Yeah, I saw that happen last year with some people where there was a guy that I struggled keeping on my roster, and I still regret that I didn't. But Elijah Moore had that kind of stretch where he started off really poorly in the beginning of the season, was kind of forgotten about, and a lot of people kind of at the same time saw AJ Green quietly but surely getting 6-7 points a game, wasn't doing anything shiny but getting 60 yards, having 3 or 4 catches. A lot of people added AJ Green. They sat on your bench. Elijah Moore eventually has a kind of burst where he has that 4 or 5 game stretch where he's a receiver 1, and that probably helped a lot of people make the playoffs. While other people had AJ Green scoring 6-7 points and probably did nothing for you, as you pointed out. You probably get that week to week on the waiver wire. So that's a great point, Adam.
Yeah. Do you have another guy you want to throw out there?
Yeah. So kind of sticking to that thought, but also guys have injury concerns. Jeff Wilson Jr. is clearly the second running back in San Francisco. We heard nothing else other than that all off season. The 49ers have shown you nothing but that. They got rid of Trey Sermon. They're not going to usually play the young guy right off the bat. Price isn't even the second backup right now or a third backup right now. So there's a clear path for Jeff Wilson Jr. to be heavily involved in anything that happens to Elijah Moore. We saw about 2 or 3 years ago before the COVID hit, Jeff Wilson had that stretch where he was scoring 25, 30 points a game because he was the man. He catches the ball a little bit, runs the ball, nothing special athletically, but has Kyle Shanahan's trust. And when you catch the ball a little bit and you run a little bit in that system, it has a lot of value. So Jeff Wilson Jr. is a guy, if you have a roster spot to kind of play with, the upside, don't worry about somebody else's handcuffs sometimes. Worry about better handcuffs, the ones with the upside. And that's Jeff Wilson Jr. in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just get the best handcuffs kind of overall, whether it's someone else's, whether it's yours, doesn't matter. Just get the ones that, aren't going to be talking, about a committee when that guy goes down. Going to get the guys who, just like the guy in front of them, kind of become that workhorse, like a Jeff Wilson, like a Madison, like how we think maybe a Michelle could be. These are the guys you kind of want as those handcuffs.
And just to add to that real quick, Adam, also guys like we're talking about Arizona backfield. If Benjamin's going to probably be the pass catcher, he has more of a clear role to kind of be contributing now and down the road. So those are the guys I think that are important to kind of look at too. Is does this guy have a potential to kind of be involved now? And then also if there's a key injury. So like you saw that with Kansas City last year where Daryl Williams was in CHE, they were able to kind of both eat when they both returned. It wasn't, when Edwards wasn't there, it was great for Daryl Williams owners. I was one of those. But, when he returned, it didn't kill you. You still have a flex option. So that's where it's kind of important. We're seeing the two-headed backfields more and more. And as a result, you're seeing more and more flex options being born out of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely a good point. Hines is someone who I think kind of falls into that category.
Great point.
My next guy actually has the potential to fall in that category as well, and that's Rex Burkhead. The Texans, again, I think are a team that are going to be down a lot. And I think if that's the case, you'll be seeing the receiving back a lot. And I still find that Burkhead will be that guy there on third downs. And they'll be facing quite a few third downs in Houston. Certainly a guy who has upside. And as you saw, fantasy playoff time last year, Burkhead went kind of berserk for Houston for a handful of weeks to cap off last season. So certainly, at least in Houston, has the ability to be very fantasy valuable, being both a receiver and a runner. So I think now I don't find it that crazy for him to be able to be someone out the gate who's getting 12 to 15 touches. And then, if a Pierce was to go down, that could definitely become a real nice spot to be in.
Yeah, let's not forget, Pierce all 4 years in Florida was never the guy. He's always shared carries with somebody. So it will be interesting will he ever kind of wear down or will be given a job to, be handling all those carries. People love to look what they saw in preseason, how hard the guy runs. A lot of times hard guys run hard, but they also get hurt easy. So, it's something to kind of keep in mind. That's a great point, Rex Burkhead, where this guy has a role now and down the road possibly. So great call.
Awesome.
The one I'll add to that is kind of running backs. Aren't guys still you have to roster, But guys, if you have a player, a spot to kind of mess around with, or you have some guys injured, Jameis Williams, I'm a Jameis Williams drafter because I have that IR to kind of put him on in the meantime, so you can kind of play around with some guys. Two another running backs to kind of think about. Sony Michelle was talked about earlier. We both, I think, we agree that it's definitely an upside opportunity. We saw what Melvin Gordon did there in that offense a few years ago. If Michelle could even capture some of that, that'd be wonderful for him. And then Dalton Hilliard from the Tennessee Titans. I know a lot of people like Haskins going into this year. You heard a lot about him coming out of the draft, but Hilliard's become the guy, and not only has he become the guy, he's going to be the third down running back. And from everything I'm understanding and hearing, that if there was something to happen to Henry, Hilliard would more than likely be the guy because he's been so impressive with all the things he can do in that backfield. So he's a guy that might have some value now early on if Tennessee's to fall down and we don't kind of see the offense kind of catch its niche, but also a guy that down the road, Derrick Henry owners, he's getting older, had coming off a major injury last year, so have some kind of security, or even as we talked about earlier, having somebody else's upside on your bench is even better. Look at somebody like that, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Definitely all good call outs there. I've alluded to this one before already on this show, but Wandel Robinson is my last guy. If he does indeed have this slot role, I think it will be the only outside Saquon, it will be the only money thing on this Giants offense. Wasn't a huge Wandel guy coming out of college. What I will give him is he is freaky fast, and he's able to translate that to the NFL. He is very fast. He is very quick. He is someone who I think had the ability to learn a route tree. He had the physical ability to. He turned his hips well. However, he didn't run one really at all in Kentucky. So I definitely had concerns there. But I think you could find him do really well in the slot role, especially in a Dable offense, and especially with someone like Daniel Jones, who can feed a slot. That's not about all he can do, but he can feed a slot receiver to fantasy relevance. Just ask Sterling Shepard. So, Chris, any final guys?
Yeah, we started off this show talking about Isaiah McKenzie and his return and how excited we were for him, kind of his role in Buffalo. And coming full circle, a guy that you talked about scouting, Wandel Robinson, McKenzie profile very similar, not a great route runner, was kind of raw, very quick though, very good athletically. We saw him kind of find his niche last year. Robinson's already been given the opportunity where McKenzie kind of had to earn it last year. So I think there's a clear role for Robinson. He's also the coach's pick. Never forget that. We always worry about the guys getting their quarterback. Sometimes like their players too. Tony wasn't their pick. Holiday wasn't their guy. Like their second rounder, they got a guy that a lot of people judged, but they stuck their neck out for. So there's every reason in the world to expect that he's probably going to get fed the ball. So I think Robinson's a great call. And I'll add one more to you. This is my necessarily to run out and get, but if you're in a full point PPR, especially, I would definitely look at this guy, David Bell. You and I talked about him going in the draft. We've always been a big fans of his, but we know Jacoby Brissett doesn't look outside the hashes very often. But Jalen Waddle got a lot of targets inside those hashes last year, did he not? It's a slot receiver. He got a crap ton of targets. So I know Cooper's the big name there, but if David Bell's truly a slot receiver in this offense, there's an easy opportunity for this guy to have 6-7 catches per game. It might not be for huge yardage or for huge amount of touchdowns, but it could be 5 or 6, 7 catches every week. So it's a guy for me that I think David Bell is a guy that kind of being forgotten about because Jacoby Brissett's the quarterback, but it might actually benefit him more than it benefits Cooper.
Yeah, I mean Njoku was another guy kind of in that vein who I think
I love Njoku.
Has a ton of value. I think he's someone that you and I may not think of as a waiver target because if he's sitting there,
people forgot him somehow.
But certainly probably available in a lot of leagues again, especially on an ESPN.
Yeah, him and Evan Ingram, guys. Don't be the last ones to catch on to those two.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, Chris, unless there's any last guys you want to hit, I think that pretty much wraps us up.
No, I'm super excited. I cannot wait till this, to kick off. The one thing I'm going to encourage everybody, Adam, and I think we'll talk about after the last show, we always kind of gave our words of advice last year's shows.
Yeah.
And one of my tips for this year is never overreact to week one. Yes. You're going to see different coaches who can kind of game plan all off season and prepared for it. Some coaches aren't as good at that. Some coaches don't adjust well. Some players are going to be taken away, where you're going to have teams that we're just not going to let this player beat us. So you might have a lot of number one receivers, for example, not shine out how you expect them to because that's kind of how the game plan goes. So don't overreact or panic after week one.
Yeah, and I mean, to jump in on that, like the variance that we're still seeing with this gap week between the preseason and the regular season, I think teams are still kind of learning how to work around that. And as a result, we're seeing very different ways that teams are handling the preseason and in training camp and practice, where on one hand, you're seeing teams where the starters have already played 75 live snaps, and then other teams, Devontae Adams hasn't touched the field as a Raider yet. So some teams might, come out of the gate really hot. They've played already. They've got that chemistry. Some teams might not. But then on the flip side, you might, see that wear and tear come in interesting times. So I'm not saying one thing or the other, whether that's good or not, but I am saying that you're going to see a lot of variance, I think, week one, that, will probably work itself back out, regress to the mean, come a couple weeks from now.
Yeah, exactly. You're going to see a lot of times, like I said, it's going to be game plans where you might see specific guys being game planned to taken away, or certain guys being featured more so just because, whereas you're alluding to, the team's still kind of adjusting to find out who they really are in a sense and kind of how they're going to hit the ground running. I'm a big believer that you can't really judge an NFL season until week 4, week 5 anymore, because it's going to be back and forth who can adjust, who can't adjust, who game plans certain ways. And then the one thing I do look for that week 1 is for, especially for the money players, is does the coaching staff move that player around? If you have a guy who's probably not going to move around, then it's something you might be a little bit more concerned about playing that guy and maybe look for a little guy who has a little easier matchup. So, for example, and I don't know if this is going to happen, but let's say Michael Thomas is a starter for New Orleans, and we kind of haven't seen Michael Thomas, but he's a big name, you love him. And you hear, he's going to have Trayvon Mullen following him around. Okay, well, maybe I'm not as big on Michael Thomas now, so maybe I go with a Dalton Schultz, who isn't somebody who I drafted as high as Michael Thomas, but I have him on my roster as a receiver option I can kind of throw out there. And now I can kind of play somebody who has a good matchup, because we look at Dallas, we talked about Noah Brown being a starter. Well, CeeDee is probably going to eat, but who else is going to eat? So that's where you can kind of maybe plan for the game planning in a sense ahead.
Yeah, no, absolutely good point. Those guys who are getting moved around a lot, there's typically a reason. Those are the focal points. So you want those guys. So definitely good point. All right, guys, that should wrap us up. Again, thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure to go ahead and tune in to the other episodes of Belly Up Fantasy Live. You'll find us on Wednesdays. You'll find us on, I know Sunday is 11 a.m. I don't know the Wednesday time yet. That's going to be a new show coming for the NFL season. So definitely excited. Go check those out. Also, go make sure to check out the Belly Up MDFF show. So, Chris, give us the official regular season schedule.
Yeah, so we'll be covering on Thursdays. Well, I myself will be joining Dan Mater. He'll be doing 5 days a week starting towards the beginning of the season. But we're just going to be kicking off this regular season right now with our 2 shows. So we'll have our regular preview show on Thursday, and on Friday we have our DFS show. We'll be joined by Chaz Filardi, and also doing our gambling betting and giving you some tips of guys to look forward going into the weekend. Not only fantasy, kind of making some money, get a chance to make some money betting too right now. So, definitely tune in and excited to continue. Like I said, Adam, football is 2 days away.
You're very excited. Very excited there. Yeah. Again, thank you so much, and we will see you next week, next Tuesday.